mother thought she was doing me a favor the night she told me I would never be more than a footnote in this family. I was 22. I had just gotten my acceptance letter to the Naval Officer Candidate School. I had driven 4 hours home to tell her in person, because I actually thought that this would be the moment she finally looked at me the way she looked at my brother. She was in the kitchen when I walked in. She didn't look up from the cutting board. I put the letter on the counter next to her. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, picked it up, read it for maybe 15 seconds, and set it back down. "You'll wash out in the first week," she said. "You always quit when things get hard." Then she went back to chopping carrots. I stood there for a long moment. I remembered the sound of the knife on the cutting board, that steady, indifferent rhythm. I remember thinking, if I leave this kitchen right now and never come back, she won't even notice until dinner gets cold. I didn't leave. I picked up the letter, folded it back into the envelope, and drove 4 hours home in the dark. But I didn't quit. My mother was a federal judge, the Honorable Catherine Aldrich. 26 years on the bench, 2 presidential commendations, her name on a scholarship at the law school she attended. In our county, people didn't just respect her, they were a little afraid of her. She had a way of looking at you across a courtroom that made you feel like every lie you'd ever told was written on your face. At home, she was the same way, except the courtroom was the dinner table and the defendant was usually me. My brother Owen was her closing argument for why the family hadn't failed. He was 3 years older, went to Georgetown on a partial scholarship, graduated top of his law class, and was now a junior partner at a firm in D.C. He called her every Sunday. He sent flowers on her birthday and Mother's Day, and sometimes for no reason at all. He had framed photographs of the two of them on his office wall. I was the case she couldn't figure out how to win. I wasn't bad at school. I wasn't in trouble. I just wasn't Owen. I didn't want to study law. I didn't want to sit in an office wearing a blazer and arguing about money. I wanted to be outside. I wanted to move. I wanted to do something that mattered in a way you could see and feel, not just read about in a brief. When I was 16, I found a book about Navy search and rescue operations in the school library. I read it twice. Then I found another one. Then I started reading everything I could find. Operations, logistics, rescue missions, the kind of work where someone's life was the outcome. My mother found one of the books in my room when I was 17 and left it on my desk with a sticky note that said, "This is not a career. This is a fantasy." I kept the note. I still have it somewhere. I graduated high school with a 3.8 GPA and a ROTC scholarship to a state university about 300 miles from home. My mother came to the graduation ceremony but left before the reception. She told my aunt she had a hearing the next morning that required preparation. 4 years later, I graduated with a degree in emergency management and a commission as an ensign in the United States Navy. My mother did not come to that ceremony. She sent a card. It said, "Congratulations, be safe." 2 words that managed to feel like neither. I went through OCS. I qualified for search and rescue operations. I cross-trained in tactical medicine, and 18 months into my career, I was recommended for a joint special operations pipeline that I cannot describe in full detail even now, because most of it is still classified. What I can tell you is that it required a level of physical and psychological endurance that broke people who had been doing this for years, and that by the time I was 28, I held a set of qualifications that very few people outside of a specific chain of command even knew existed. My call sign was Ironside. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't like the movies. It was cold water and wrong hours and the specific kind of fear that doesn't feel like fear at all. It feels like clarity. Everything unnecessary falls away. You see exactly what needs to happen and you do it. I loved it. I loved it the way I had never loved anything else. And nobody in my family knew. The invitation came in October of last year. My mother's retirement gala. 26 years on the federal bench, and the County Bar Association was throwing her a dinner at the Harrington Hotel downtown. 300 guests, a keynote from the state senior senator, awards speeches, a video tribute they'd apparently been working on for months. My aunt called me to make sure I was coming. She said my mother had not specifically asked about me, but that my absence would be, she paused, noticed. I took 10 days of leave and drove home. I hadn't seen my mother in 14 months. I hadn't told her what unit I was with or what I was doing or where I had been. She hadn't asked. Our last real conversation had been a phone call that lasted 6 minutes, during which she told me Owen had just made full partner and that the firm was sending him to London for a 6-month rotation. That's great for Owen, I said. It's what happens when you build something, she said. I let that sit on the line between us for a moment. I should go, I said. I have an early morning. She didn't ask what kind of morning. She never did. The gala was on a Friday evening. I arrived at the Harrington in my dress uniform. I had debated that. I considered just wearing a suit. But I had earned what I wore, and I was done being smaller than I was, just to make her comfortable. The ballroom was the kind of room that makes you feel like you've walked into a different century. High ceilings, chandeliers, round tables with white linen and centerpieces that probably cost more than my first month's pay. I checked in at the reception table and a woman I didn't recognize handed me a program with my mother's face on the cover. I found a seat at a table near the middle of the room. My aunt was there, and 2 of my mother's colleagues from the courthouse, and a retired attorney named Gerald, who had apparently known my mother since law school and wanted to tell me all about it. Owen arrived 20 minutes after I did. He walked in with his wife Tamsin, and they were immediately swallowed by a cluster of people near the bar who all seemed to know him. He moved through the room like someone who had rehearsed being there. He saw me eventually, raised his glass across the room and went back to his conversation. My mother made her entrance at 7:15. She wore navy blue, of course she did, and her hair was up, and she looked exactly the way she always looked. Composed, deliberate, like she had already decided how this evening was going to go. People moved toward her the way people move toward gravity. She shook hands, accepted embraces, said things that made small clusters of people laugh at exactly the right moments. She saw me from across the room. I watched her face do the thing it always did, a slight adjustment, a recalibration. Then she nodded once and turned back to her conversation. I went to the bar and ordered club soda with lime. The trouble started during cocktail hour. I was standing near the windows with my aunt when Owen drifted over with a group of his father's old colleagues, men in their 60s who all had the particular energy of people who had never once doubted they belonged in any room they entered. One of them, a man named Holloway, who I vaguely recognized from old Christmas parties, looked at my uniform with the specific kind of curiosity that isn't really curiosity at all. "Navy," he said. "What do you do exactly?" "Operational support," I said. It was the answer I always gave. "She does logistics," Owen said from beside him. He said it easily without looking at me. "The way you'd describe a piece of furniture. Scheduling, supply chain. She's good at the organizational side of things." There it was. I had heard variations of this my whole life. She's the responsible one. She's practical. She keeps things running behind the scenes. Always framed as a compliment, always meaning she is not important enough to be interesting. I looked at Owen. He was already looking at Holloway, already moving the conversation forward. My mother materialized at the edge of the group. She had heard it. I could see that she had heard it, and I could see her choose in real time, in the space of half a second, to let it stand. "Your mother was telling me your brother just made partner," Holloway said to me. "I heard," I said. "Big deal, full partnership. You must be proud of him." I smiled. "Of course." My mother looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at my uniform and something crossed her face that I had seen before, not embarrassment exactly, but a kind of impatience, like I was a variable she had not accounted for. Vivienne does important work, she said in a tone that made important work sound like something you say about volunteers who sought donated clothing. She's always been dedicated. Thank you, I said. She moved away. I stood there with my club soda, and I thought about a drainage ditch behind our house where I used to go when I was 9 years old, because it was the one place in our property where I couldn't hear her voice through the windows. I would lie on my back in the tall grass next to it and look up at the sky and breathe. Just breathe. That was all I wanted sometimes, just to breathe without anyone telling me I was doing it wrong. I thought about that ditch a lot that evening. Dinner was served at 8. The speeches started at 9. The senator's office sent a representative who read a commendation. 2 of my mother's former clerks spoke. Then Owen stood up and gave a toast that was genuinely good, warm, funny in the right places, honest in a way that surprised me. He talked about watching her work when he was a kid, about how she taught him that precision was a form of respect. He got a standing ovation. I sat at my table and clapped. I was not asked to speak. When my mother stood to give her remarks, she thanked her clerks, her colleagues, the Bar Association, the Senator's office. She thanked Owen by name and said he was the best of her. She paused at the end of that sentence just long enough for everyone in the room to feel its weight. She thanked me by saying, "And my daughter Vivienne, who serves in the Navy." That was it. No pause, no elaboration. Vivienne, who serves in the Navy. Like reading an ingredient off a label. I looked down at my hands on the table. I counted my breaths the way they taught us in the program. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. It's a technique for staying functional when everything in you wants to break. I stayed functional. The call came at 9:47. I felt my phone vibrate in my jacket pocket, not my personal phone, the other one, the one I always carry, the one with a specific ringtone that I had only ever heard twice before outside of training. I looked at the screen under the table. It was Commander Whitfield. I excused myself from the table quietly, stepped out through the side door into the corridor and answered. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. There was a situation. There was a team already in position. There was a piece of the operation that required my specific technical qualifications and my specific clearance level, and the briefing would begin in 2 hours. "Can you make it?" Whitfield said. "Yes," I said. "Ironside," he said. "Good, we'll see you there." I stood in the corridor for a moment after I hung up. The sound of applause was coming through the ballroom doors. Someone was being recognized for something. I put the phone back in my pocket and went back inside to get my things. I was at my table, quietly collecting my jacket and bag, when I heard Owen's voice behind me. "Leaving early?" I looked up. He was standing there with a glass of wine, looking genuinely curious, and for a moment I saw something in his face that I hadn't expected, something uncertain, almost young. "I have to go," I said. "Work?" "Yes." He looked at me for a moment. "What do you actually do, Viv? Like, really?" I considered that question. I'd considered it many times over many years in different forms from different people. "I can't really talk about it," I said. He stared at me. "I'm not being evasive," I said. "I genuinely cannot talk about it. Not here." He opened his mouth to say something else, but my mother had appeared beside him. She looked at my jacket in my arms and at my bag on the chair. "You're leaving." It was not a question. "I have to report in," I said. "It's a Friday evening." "Yes." She looked at me the way she had looked at defendants for 26 years, like she could see through whatever story I was telling and find the smaller, sadder truth underneath it. "This is my retirement dinner," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry." "You're always sorry," she said quietly. not loudly enough for the tables nearby to hear. You've been sorry your entire life. Sorry you couldn't commit to anything. Sorry you couldn't build something. You put on that uniform and you think it means something, but logistics coordinators and scheduling officers don't get called in on a Friday night, Vivienne, so either you're lying to seem more important than you are, or you're running away again, which is what you do. I looked at her. She looked at me. The ballroom was full of 300 people, and the sound of a jazz quartet and glasses touching glasses, and the long, complicated echo of everything she had ever said to me in every room I had ever tried to breathe in. I have to go, I said. Typical, she said. I picked up my bag. The operation took 11 days. I cannot tell you where it was. I cannot tell you what it involved or who was there or what the outcome was. I can tell you that when it was over, Commander Whitfield shook my hand and said words I will not repeat here because they are mine to keep. I can tell you that I came home with a new line in my file and a recommendation that, 3 months later, became something official that also lives in my file. I took 2 weeks of leave after. I rented a cabin in the Shenandoah Valley, and I slept, and I read, and I ate food I cooked myself, and I walked in the woods every morning until my legs ached. I didn't call anyone. I didn't answer most messages. I was very tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. My aunt called on a Wednesday afternoon. I answered because she was one of the few people I always answered. "Your mother has been asking about you," she said. "How is she?" I said. "She's fine. She's adjusting. The retirement is harder than she expected." A pause. "She watched the news last week. There was a piece about a joint operation, somewhere overseas. They didn't use names, but she called me after. She was quiet about it." "Quiet how?" I said. "The way she gets quiet when she's working something out," my aunt said. "She asked me if I knew what unit you were assigned to." I looked out the window of the cabin at the tree line. The leaves had started to turn, red and orange at the edges, still green in the center. "What did you tell her?" I said. "I told her I didn't know, which is true." Another pause. "She said, and I'm telling you this because I think you should know. She said, I think I've been wrong about something." I sat with that for a moment. "Okay," I said. "That's all, okay." "I don't know what she was wrong about," I said. "She'd have to tell me herself." She called on a Thursday morning 6 weeks later. I was in my apartment, drinking coffee, watching the light come through the kitchen window at the particular angle it only hits in early winter, when the sun is low and the shadows go long before noon. I almost didn't answer. I sat there for 3 rings and looked at her name on the screen and thought about 9-year-old me in the drainage ditch, about 22-year-old me driving 4 hours home in the dark, about the cutting board and the sticky note and the retirement dinner and 2 words, congratulations, be safe. I answered on the 4th ring. "Vivienne," she said. "Hi," I said. A silence, not the kind that meant she was gathering arguments, a different kind, unfamiliar. "I owe you an apology," she said. I didn't say anything. "I've been thinking about what I said at the dinner, about running away, about not building anything." She stopped. "I didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't know what you do. I still don't know, fully. But I've heard some things. From people I respect, people whose judgment I trust." Another pause. "I called your commanding officer." I blinked. "You called Commander Whitfield?" I didn't know who else to call. I told his assistant who I was and why I was calling, and I asked if he could tell me anything about your service record. She was quiet for a moment. "He told me he could not share classified information. And then he said, your daughter has done things that most people in this building will never know happened, and that's by design, and that's exactly the point." The kitchen window, the low winter light. "Okay," I said. I spent 30 years on the bench, she said. I built a record I'm proud of. I thought that was what mattered. Visible achievement. Something you could point to. Something with your name on it. Her voice was careful, deliberate. Still a judge, even now. But something underneath it I hadn't heard before. I think I taught you that nothing counted unless it looked the way I thought it should look, and I think I was wrong. I pressed my fingers against the warm side of my coffee mug. I'm not asking you to forgive me immediately, she said. I know it doesn't work that way. I just wanted you to know that I understand I've been looking at the wrong things. I thought about the last 11 days I had spent in that cabin, the way the silence had felt like finally getting enough air, the way I had walked in the woods every morning not to prove anything to anyone, but just because I wanted to. Just because the light was good and my legs worked and I was alive and present in a body that had learned to do extraordinary things, and none of it had ever needed her signature to be real. I know you've been wrong, I said. It came out quieter than I intended, not angry, just true. Yes, she said. I'm not going to pretend it didn't cost me anything. It did. It costs me every time I have to explain to someone why I don't really talk to my family. It costs me when I'm somewhere difficult and I think about calling home and then I remember what home feels like. I paused, but I'm not interested in holding on to it forever either. That's not what I want my life to look like. What do you want? She said, and for the first time in my memory, the question sounded genuine. I want to have a real conversation with you, I said, not one where you've already decided what I am before I open my mouth. I want you to ask me actual questions and listen to the actual answers. I can do that, she said, quietly, like she was taking an oath. We'll see, I said. It was not forgiveness, it was not a reunion. It was a door opened one careful inch, and the light coming through was thin and new, and I wasn't sure yet what was on the other side. But I'd spent a long time in dark and difficult places waiting for the right moment to move. I knew how to be patient. I knew how to read the situation. I knew that some things only come to the people willing to hold still long enough to let them arrive. I put down my coffee and looked at the winter light on my kitchen floor and thought, there are things in this world that don't need a name on a plaque or a photograph on a wall or 300 guests in a hotel ballroom to be real. Some things are real because you did them, because they happened and they mattered and you were there. That has always been enough. That will always be enough. There's a moment near the end of that phone call with my mother where she said, I think I've been wrong about something, and I didn't feel the relief I always imagined I would feel. I thought for years that hearing those words would fix something, that it would close a door that had been banging in the wind my whole life, but it didn't feel like that. It felt quieter, smaller, like finding a room you'd been locked out of for 20 years and realizing the room was just a room. What I understand now is that my mother was not a cruel person. She was a person who had built her entire sense of the world around what she could see and measure and point to. Verdicts, commendations, a name on a scholarship. She genuinely believed that if something didn't have a visible shape, it didn't count, and she applied that belief to me the same way she applied it to everything, completely, consistently, without room for exception. That's the thing about a person's character, though. It doesn't just affect the people they love. It comes back around to them. My mother spent 26 years being right about things in public, and it made her certain she was right about things in private too. She dismissed me the same way she dismissed a weak argument, quickly, cleanly, without much consideration. And the consequence of that wasn't something I handed her. It was something she built herself, one dinner table at a time, one sticky note at a time, one retirement speech at a time, one retirement speech at a time. She created the distance between us through 1,000 small choices, and eventually that distance became the only thing standing between her and the truth of who I actually was. I didn't plan any of that. I didn't leave her gala to make a point. Commander Whitfield called and I answered because that's what I do, because I had made a commitment that meant something, because the work I had chosen required exactly the kind of person I had fought my entire life to become. Someone who shows up, who holds steady, who does not fold under pressure or disappear when things get hard. That's what I think about when people ask me how I got through the training, the operations, the years of working in classified spaces, where no one outside a very small circle knew what I was doing or why it mattered. The answer is that I had been training my whole life, not in a gym, not on a range, in that kitchen with my mother, in that car driving home in the dark at 22. In every moment I chose to keep going when the clearest and easiest thing would have been to become the person she had already decided I was. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't show up on a transcript, the ability to read a situation clearly, to separate what's true from what people need to be true, to act on what actually is rather than what you wish were different. I had to develop that early, and there's a kind of integrity that only gets built in private, when no one is watching and no one will know, when the only reason to do the right thing is because you've decided that's who you are. I built that too. And underneath both of them, the clarity and the integrity was something simpler, just the refusal to stop. Not because I was fearless, not because it was easy, but because I had decided, somewhere around the age of 9, in a drainage ditch in our backyard, that my life was going to be mine, that no one else's inability to see me was going to determine what I was capable of becoming. My mother is learning that now, slowly, one careful phone call at a time. I don't know what we'll build from here, but I know how to be patient, I know how to work in the dark, and I know that some things are real whether or not anyone with power ever decides to acknowledge them. I always knew that. It just took her a little longer to catch up.